And we're checking to see if we are live yet, please.
We're live. We're live, Gail.
All right, welcome everyone to our Talking Racism series. We are going to play a little short video clip and then we will continue. I apologize for us being a little bit late. We're waiting on one of our guests to arrive at this time. But in the meantime, I have a clip that I'd like to show you. So please take a look. Okay, that was a little video clip that kind of introduces what our topic is today, and it's about why take a knee. And that is our subject of our last program of our Talking Racism series that we're having. Anyway, the conversation actually never ends. But I'm glad to welcome one of our guests that's here right now, and it's Mr. Mark Douglas, familiar face to many. I'm going to actually have to put on my little readers. I was trying to get out of it, but I can't see a thing. But so I'm going to read a little bit about, we know him from Avis Ford for sure. Mark is the president of Avis Ford Incorporated, a nationally ranked Ford dealership in Metro Detroit. Avis is the top 100 performing dealerships, currently ranked 24th nationally. That's a big deal. Mark began his career at General Motors. He was employed for 6 years there as a project release engineer, where he designed and released interior electric switches. Very good. You attended Howard University. You have your MBA from the University of Michigan. Go Blue, huh? I'm so glad to have you join us in this conversation, Mark. Thank you for being here. I very much appreciate it and respect your time.
Well, thank you for having me, Gail. It's my pleasure.
All right, so we had a little bit of a look at the clip, and it's our subject, talking racism, and we're talking about why take a knee. So many controversial points with this. Some are for it, some are against it. It's a big deal now. In light of some of the things that have occurred, we see it more often. It started way back on the football field, and it offended many, but many African Americans can understand why it's happening. What is your input a little bit on why take a knee? Are you for it or against it, or just in general, why are people doing this?
Well, I've always been 100% in support of it. Number one reason being the issue at hand is not, it's interesting because the tie to the American flag or to the national anthem, really, people want to make that connection or that correlation somehow to the military. Well, that was never Colin Kaepernick's original point. His point was this flag represents liberty and justice for all. There's various, ways you can apply the national anthem, not simply to the military. So his stance, and not necessarily, well, and I won't even call it honoring or dishonoring the flag, because everywhere I've been or everything I've been associated with, when you take a knee, you're actually showing deference. I don't know how many
I
games,
thought that too, right? Originally, that's what I thought.
people are out here, but usually when you bow down to the king, you're usually showing deference when you take that stance. So it was never, in my opinion, or from my visual, in any way, a means of disrespect. If anything, it was a show of deference, but more importantly, it was a different stance than what people are perhaps used to. And in doing that, he was making a statement using his platform to say, hey, we've got an issue in this country with police brutality. So I'm not against the police. I'm not against the flag. I'm not against the military. But this is just my way of showing what is actually happening to Black men in America today. And that's something that, there's numerous ways you can do it. And that's one of the things that we're finding out when you start to do things that aren't always in line with the majority race, that they tend to look at things as wrong or not right. Well, who's to say what is the right way to do a peaceful protest? If I'm doing a peaceful protest, it's my choice. And that's where I think this whole thing has really gotten off canter and really put things in a poor light. And it just goes to show you who's really pulling the purse strings in a lot of these situations, because I saw a clip just yesterday. They talk about, the various protests that African Americans take or have taken in this case. But yet you can be a white, Nazi or a white sort of, what am I trying to say? Confederate flag, displaying individual that can go with armed weapons into the state capitol, but that's not considered violent. But yet a peaceful protest with multiple races of people can be viewed as, wrong for some reason. But I don't know. It's kind of where things are today, and it's really unfortunate. But the divisiveness is what I'm hopefully here to help quell today, because at the end of the day, it's about liberty and justice for all, not just some.
And that's what we're striving for, that liberty and justice for all. And then when will we see the justice? When will we see the equality, particularly in our African American men? What is going to happen to make this happen? If you take a knee, then that's offensive. If you don't, and you try and even peaceful protest, that's wonderful, and I believe in that. But then when will we see results? And I wonder, what do we have to do to see results? Because when I see our African American men, and I respect and I honor our boys and our men of African American descent, and it's a beautiful thing. But when the world and the country, there's a whole nother connotation to that. And I don't understand. How do we help others to understand what
Well,
African Americans are looking for?
Well, I think that's kind of at the root of where this sort of, began. Police have their own opinions, excuse me, about African American men, sometimes at the onset, regardless of fact or actual circumstance. And I'm not here to sit here and act like everybody is great. I mean, there are some bad people out here. I had a good friend that was actually in my office earlier today. He's a police officer. He and his partner were actually two of the officers that were involved in the altercation a few weeks ago that started the protest on I think it was 6 Mile in San Juan. His partner was actually one of the initial officers that had the engagement with the individual that fired the initial shots. So he was kind of re-enlightening me on things, or enlightening me on things that there are really bad people out here. So, but he also recognizes that he can't always assume that everyone's a bad person. I mean, for instance, one time, this is in my younger days, I'm a Ford dealer, so I've driven some nice cars, and I used to like wheels and things like that on my truck. And one time I can remember pulling out of my street onto 7 Mile, and I guess it was a lazy turn. There was no traffic coming, but there was a police officer coming the opposite direction on 7 Mile, and he's yelling out his window, telling me to pull over, pull over. No lights. So he U-turns and pulls up behind me. I mean, and he read me the act like you would have thought, I was I did something wrong to his family member or something. I mean, it was horrible. I mean,
Yeah.
and then he was like, "Well, why are you so nervous?" I said, "Well, look at how you talking to me, man. I don't, I'm scared to reach in the back."
Yeah.
And at this time, I was I had a CCW at the time, and I was scared to reach into the back because my suit jacket was hanging, in the on the hook behind my seat. So I had to reach back there to get my driver's license. When you're pulled over and you are a card carrying member, you're supposed to give them that first. So he came up with such interrogation. I couldn't even get to him what I needed to get to him because he was assuming I was, and then, well, you needed this, and at the end of the day, of course, he let me go because I didn't do anything wrong. But it was one of those circumstances where it was just blatant assumption for who he thought I might be, and plus it was kind of the middle of the day. So, but these things happen. But that's where I think both sides have to be, number one, patient and understanding of the other person, meaning, of course, it's a police officer, so I have to be respectful of what he may think or not know about my situation, but he's got to also be respectful of the person in the vehicle as well.
Exactly. I understand that completely. And I guess I should have started by saying, of course, we know we are not accusing all police officers. We love the majority of our police officers are fine. And it's unfortunate that some of them have to take a bad rap for the few that are doing the things as you mentioned, Mark. But it is what it is, and it is a big deal, and we have to make it a big deal. And voices must be heard in order for action to take place. Is enough action occurring now? Because it seems to me after the George Floyd incident, or right when it happened up until maybe a couple of weeks ago, things are starting to die down with the conversation. It appears, maybe in media, maybe, are we going to go back to square one? What is going to happen to make it go back to the top of the list and ranking of priority in terms of needing to be addressed, not just with the police issue, but with racial equality overall? What do you think
Well,
about that?
I mean, I really hope not. And that's always been sort of the question. How do you make systemic change? What do we need to truly do to make sure that, as you mentioned, this doesn't just get sort of swept under the rug as time moves on? I think the biggest I think sort of position that seems to be taking hold is that it's not enough to just say, I'm not racist. You have to be anti-racist. I think that's sort of the biggest statement that has come out of this whole thing. And ultimately, sort of the way that it's been presented this time, I think some people or more people are starting to sort of get it, in that when you say, well, all lives matter, blue lives matter, there's been different campaigns that went down those roads. Well, they always talk about, well, all houses matter, but if my
Yeah,
house is on fire,
right.
I think my house needs a little more water than the next one. And finally, I think that message is coming forward. But what do we need to do to truly make this systemic change? I think it really starts at the front lines, i.e., the police force, because clearly that is where the misconception starts. Now, we can't speak to what's going to happen when, a white officer encounters a black person, or a black officer encounters a white person, if they're not necessarily from the same community. I know there's been talk lately of the city of Detroit going back to policing where you live. So, I mean, for years when I grew up, police officers, firefighters, anyone that worked for the city had to live in the city. I know there's been talk of making those sort of blue laws back, bringing those things back again. So that can only help the situation, because now you're going to more so, work where you live and ultimately have a better understanding of the people that you're policing.
I know most recently, an organization is trying to remove the chief of police in the city of Detroit. Um, I don't know. What do you think about that? Do we?
I don't see any reason to go down that road.
Mm,
I personally think he's doing an outstanding job. I mean, for instance, the shooting that I've just spoke to a few weeks ago. I mean, he put his neck out there to address the issue. I mean, he had the facts, but obviously there can be a situation where you don't have all the facts, and you may misspeak, and you could do yourself a disservice. Well, he was willing to risk that to make sure that he got the proper information out, or at least the facts that he knew were indeed facts. He made it a point to get them out there as soon as possible to hopefully, you know, squash that situation as quickly as possible, because it could have easily gotten out of hand. I mean, they were marching right up 7 Mile, right to the 12th precinct, and who knows what could have happened had, you know, because it seems now today you've got these sort of serial protesters that don't even necessarily represent
right.
the entity that they're, you know, there to quote unquote protest in favor of. I mean, they've got their own agenda, or it seems at times that they've got their own agenda, and it might not necessarily be aligned with the current situation. Because, again, once those facts came out, I think it was clear that those officers acted pretty much as they should have.
And then when I'm thinking of, I play around with this in my head all the time, and I think one way and then I think another. When we need to come up with an answer to how to resolve all of this that's going on, from the police, for the racial injustices, who is to come up with the answer? What area? I one while was thinking, African Americans, we've said what we wanted. Is it up to non-blacks to then act upon it and then be accountable for change? Because we can speak it, but then who does the real action?
Well, I think it goes back to the point I stated before. It's not good enough to just be, to say I'm not a racist, because everyone is in racist situations at times. I mean, there's blacks that speak, racially about whites.
Mhm.
I can't allow that. I have to say, everyone has to do their part in terms of stepping up and recognizing where racism exists, and look to do our part to abolish it when we can. It's not good enough to just, laugh and not say anything, or just, you've got to be willing to step out there and take a stance on when you hear things, or when you hear different comments from people, or jokes from individuals I mean, it shouldn't be funny anymore. I guess that's kind of what it comes down. But that's just in terms of eliminating what's on the surface. To get what's beneath the surface, I think it has to start. It has to start somewhere in local government. I mean, i.e., the police, but then ultimately in leadership positions. I mean, it goes beyond just the racial injustice. I mean, it's economic as well. I mean, from things like businesses, for instance. I always say, I don't want to be the black Ford dealer. I just want to be a Ford dealer that happens to be African American or black.
Yes.
So, because, once you get sort of labeled in that category, there's no telling what can happen. I mean, black people don't come to you just because you're black, or, will white people stop coming to you once they know that you're black? I mean, you never really know how those things can turn out. So the idea is just be good at what you do. And ideally, the customers should be there, and treat all customers the same, and treat all customers fairly, and show diversity in your workplace. You want to look like the community that you serve. So I need white salespeople, I need females, I need black, I need everything. So Asian, Arab American, or whatever. But at the end of the day, you want to represent every aspect of our community in every way. So if that's government, politics, obviously the Detroit city workforce. I mean, the police department, the fire department, all these different things need to be sort of a melting pot of where they exist.
I agree, and I like what you said. You said even starting with local government and businesses to make change. Many times we look at the higher up, even national government, to make change. We're looking so far out of reach, and that's not where it starts. It starts at home. It starts in our companies. It starts in our businesses, and not just saying, okay. And I agree with you. Hiring a diverse group of people, I do agree with that. But then also to go a step beyond that and determining what that step is, something that causes equality economics. You mentioned economics. I believe if we're not equal economically, we're not equal. No matter how many Black people you hire, non-Black companies hire Black people, if the economics are not starting to balance in some sort, where is the equality? And we can't just rely on national government. I am absolutely a voter. I vote in every single election, but it has to go beyond that. Something, somewhere, I don't know if it's a body or a person who has to take a stance to say, we need to see change overall in the economy for Black people to start to a little bit get equal. I don't know if it'll ever be equal, but starting to rise is not just hiring, it's taking another step. And when we don't know the answer to what that is, I think if you prioritize the decisions that you need to make, I know with the COVID-19 out, what did it come out? The end of 2019, and it seems like it's been forever. It seems like we've been cooped up in the house forever, but it's literally only been months, and we're seeing action, action, action. Stimulus checks. Let's do something for the businesses. Let's try and wear masks. Let's try. We're seeing really active, right or wrong, agree with it or not. We're seeing something being done. And I don't see that when it comes to racial issues. I'm starting to see a little bit more compassion or understanding or empathy, which is good. I commend that. But where is the action that's going to really result in change? That's the part that's lacking. And this has been hundreds of years. So
Well,
things
that's,
can be done, I think, a little bit quicker.
well, I was
Am I
just going to
wrong?
say, well, see, that ties into the point, really. I mean, when white America has had a 400-year head start, kind of tough to catch up. I mean,
Right.
with free labor for the first 250 or 300 years of that. So it's really tough to catch up. I mean, you got to remember things were, I mean, education was illegal or an out, we were out, we weren't allowed to educate ourselves. I mean, so the fact that, people always talk about, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Well, we didn't have boots, let
Yep.
alone straps.
Good one.
So, so when you start talking about the economics of things, and there's still the issue, and see, we need to get back to, there's always the discussion of the Oklahoma City bombings, right? Where we had our Black Wall Street, and that was taken. Segregation, there's very few, or a lot of folks, I should say, that say segregation was sort of the worst thing that ever happened to Black people, because once you didn't have to go to the Black butcher or have to go to the Black laundromat, somehow they felt privileged to be able to go to these other places, and a lot of the Black businesses went out of business as a result of that. Well, you go back to those times, we were entrepreneurs by nature. We were forced to be, because otherwise we couldn't get the natural goods and services that we needed. A friend of mine mentioned recently, they were out at, Somerset Mall, and all the people in line for the Gucci store and the Louis Vuitton store were Black people. And that is, that's painstaking to me to think that we've got all this buying power and all of these dollars, and all we do is consume. That dollar never stays within the Black community, or very rarely stays within the Black community. And that's a mindset that we need to begin to change within Black folks. I mean, I'm not going to say we need to always support Black business, but we need to do a better job of that where we can, because there's obviously certain things that you can't buy from Black businesses, but at the same time, there's a lot of things that we can to do that. But more importantly, we need to change our mindset to not just necessarily buy Black, but let's go into business for ourselves. Let's do things, because that's the only way you truly get wealthy in this country. I mean, we're based on capitalism. You've got to own your own business, or you got to look to try and own something that's going to ultimately, pay you dividends. So that is my opinion, is the best economic approach that we can take, and that's to try to find a way to be economically independent. Mailbox money, as my father calls it, where,
Yeah.
where next thing you know, a check shows up, not necessarily for going to work, but for putting the work in.
Do you believe African Americans have the equal opportunity to do everything that you suggest? What about those that have the brain, they have the mindset, they have the desire, they have the drive, but they don't necessarily have the resources? Who should be accountable? Is it up to the African Americans to figure it out, just as some have?
Well,
Um,
well, that's
do you
changing.
think?
See, like for instance, my MBA, I had an MBA from the University of Michigan. That now costs almost 5 times what it cost when I went to school.
Mhm.
So the point is, education is, we're kind of being priced out when it comes to education. So if you don't have the grants, if you don't have the resources, I mean, I remember people would graduate from medical school with somewhere around $100,000 in debt. That would
Mhm.
include undergraduate and medicals and professional school. Now that's just undergrad. So when you
Yeah.
start talking about where education, or the cost of education, what it truly takes to be successful, used to be if you worked hard and you were smart, you could get there. You could get scholarships. There was things of that nature to help you get there. Well, it's not necessarily the case anymore. So um, while that's a part of it, I think to answer your question directly, the resources are there, but it's about access and opportunity. What we call that luck, right? So they
Hmm.
say luck is when, you know,
Right.
when opportunity um,
It's-
meets access, so to speak. So
Yeah.
it's sometimes it takes a little luck, sometimes it takes help. And that's another thing. We've got to reach back more. Too many times we have African Americans that become successful, and they say, "Well, I'm not messing this up for anybody." So they
Hmm.
they kind of move off into their own little corner, and they try to just be, just function. But we've got to continually reach back. I mean, because no one's done it without help. Um, there's been a lot of African Americans that have been successful because some white person helped them along the way, and
Mhm.
that's good. That's a good thing. And then there's blacks that are successful because blacks helped them along the way. But the point is, you've got to help someone. You got to try to bring someone else along with you. But yes, the resources are there. They're not as plentiful as they once were, and we don't have things like affirmative action.
Hmm.
There's a lot of individuals that made a way because of things like affirmative action or
What do you
programs.
think about that? What do you think about the affirmative action? Should we bring that back? Is it gone? I mean,
Well,
sometimes you hear it a little bit, but
well,
not really those terms, but
well, they talk about it, and in minority, like MBEs or minority business enterprises, so they get an opportunity to perhaps participate in a spectrum that they may not have always had an opportunity. So that's sort of the new affirmative action.
hmm,
If you're a business owner, you can get in the door. Diversity and inclusion.
right.
When it comes to the workplace, but now that women have been grouped in that almost equally to race.
Hmm.
And whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, I don't, it gets tough. I mean, I would love for something of that type to be in place again, where there be some kind of standard. And again, that's where the government, private sector, public sector starts to get kind of gray, because
Right.
it's difficult to tell someone how to run their business, because oftentimes, and you can't do things like quotas, because what often happens is you'll set a quota and you just don't have the resources. There just may not be enough employees. Like for instance, when Amazon was talking about coming to Detroit as their potential headquarters, I know one of the primary things they stated was that the education base wasn't sufficient.
Hmm.
I mean, that's right, wrong, or indifferent. It just is. So I think you run into that certain times with certain types. It could be a supplier, it could be, a workforce. So all these things need to be looked at. And we first have to take a look at ourselves, meaning African Americans, and determine what's best or what do we need to do to get back in the fight. And, when I came up, it was all about education.
Hmm.
It's funny, people talk about reparations now. I've always said, well, shoot, let us go to college for free for the next 300 years. That could
There
balance.
you go. Oh, you know what? I hear you. I hear you.
I mean,
What are the chances of that happening?
because
Easier said than done. Is it doable? Maybe not 300 years, but something.
no,
What
not
do you think?
300 years. I
I
mean, but
understand, but
because here's the thing. I mean, and this is in a way that I sort of understand both arguments. Why should the people of today pay for the sins of the people from yesterday? But at the same time, we're still paying for it,
yeah.
in our lack of resources. So, but at the same time, education. I mean, it shouldn't be an easy process. I mean, you should have to go through some type of rigor and apply, and there should be standards you have to keep. But at the same time, as long as I meet a certain standard, i.e. 2.0 or whatever the threshold is, and I can get accepted into a college, if I'm looking to better myself, I mean, that helps everyone. That tide raises all boats, because a more educated group of people is going to be a more civilized group of people. They're going to
And
be
prepared and
they're-
future prepared group of
and
people.
more prepared for their future and setting a future, because you ultimately have to have a plan. To go to college, you got to have a plan. I remember that one thing, that one specific about me and the majority of my good friends when I was coming up that have done fairly well or are fairly successful. We all had an agenda. We had a plan. We knew what we were working toward. It wasn't about, okay, well, I'm just going to college because that's what you're supposed to do. We had goals. We were ambitious, and 90% of us ended up doing what we set out to do. Now, whether that's what we're still doing today, like I'm not an engineer anymore, but I always knew that I was going to probably go back and get an MBA also. So.
I love that. And I commend that as well, because a lot of times in the forefront are not African American men like yourself who set out goals, or even ones that know how to set a goal and work toward that goal to achieve it. I have a youth empowerment organization, and I work with young people that they don't even know how to have the desire to have a goal. And it starts with, and I understand we've been talking about college and making that free, but I don't even understand why at this point we don't have equal education, even in elementary school, middle school, high school. It starts there. A lot of the argument is, well, going to college and not being prepared, but why is there not equality in the elementary schools? I think I mentioned in one of the other programs that we've had, as soon as everything shut down because of the coronavirus, things occurred where Detroit Public School students were suddenly accessible to laptops and headsets and why hasn't this happened all along? If it can happen, why hasn't it? Is there something that's going on that's keeping Black people down from elementary school age to where they get to be older? Then they're stuck, they're trapped, and then we're wondering, why aren't they making goals? Why aren't they setting goals? Well, what was imparted in them in the beginning? Can we blame it on parents who are struggling to put food on the table? Who is to blame? We have to place blame and not be afraid to place blame in order to address the issue and move forward.
Well, a big piece of that for me has always been sort of the war on drugs. I mean, we unfortunately lost, when crack cocaine came in the late 80s, unfortunately, we lost a huge group of mothers, fathers, etc., either to the drug itself or to incarceration or murder or death. And ultimately that has placed a huge void probably in the African American community more than any other. I'm not saying every other community wasn't hit by that, because they were also, but I think we probably and ultimately the destruction of the family unit. So, and I think as a result of that void that was created from basically the 80s to, let's just say even today, I mean, it's still not gone, but once that void was sort of open, and there was the sort of the disintegration of the family, mother and father at home, or mothers raising sons, or vice versa, fathers raising daughters, things just really went awry in terms of that home unit. So many times, our teachers are dealing with parental or home issues to where they very rarely have time to even deal with studies or the academic piece. And then, we'll add other components that came in, the No Child Left Behind. So if I'm little Johnny and I've been pushed from third grade and fifth grade and, the passing grades, quote unquote, and then I get to eighth grade and I really can't read,
Hmm.
And the teacher calls on me, well, what do you think I'm going to do in class? I'm going to act out. I'm not going to sit there and just let the whole crowd laugh or the whole room laugh at me when I try to read and I'm struggling with the simplest of words. I'm going to act out and get thrown out, because then I don't have to stay and deal with the consequences any longer of the humiliation. So you've had, I mean, there's so many, you know, areas that you can really speak to that send, you know, a student or a child all the way down the wrong path with limited to no hope. They start to believe, well, I can never learn to read. I'm 15 and I'm in the, you know, eighth grade, you know, I'll never learn to read. Well, that's where we have to, again, we have to look ourselves in the mirror and we have to accept the challenge to say, I'm going to do better. I want to do better. I want to do better for myself and for my family. And we can't, you know, to say that, you know, the streets is the only way out. Like I said, we've got to try something else. And I think if we can get back to education, and that's the other thing, we got to make school fun or cool again. You know, there's a time when, you know, my peers would look at me and say, well, you know, what do you mean you got a D? What's wrong with you? Like, you're not supposed to be doing, I mean, you went to class, right? You're at school because it was, you know, we liked hanging out at school. That's where the girls were. And that's where fun was, right? So the point was, you know, why would you not want to be the smart kid? And that's where we got to kind of reshape that mentality, make school, make being smart good.
And I think that's the same across the board for all races. I believe everyone feels that as well. You're right. I agree. And some people may wonder, are you talking about why take a knee? Yes, because to me, all of it works together. Understanding diversity, understanding racial tension, understanding the disadvantage that African Americans have had all along, all connects back to why take a knee. And I think let's go back a little bit on that conversation about why take a knee. And for those who feel like we're dishonoring America or we don't love America, we don't love the flag, we don't love whatever. Speak on that. Do we? We can't speak on behalf of everyone, but what can you say on it?
I mean, I love the flag. I love America. I mean, it's the greatest country in the world. There's nowhere else I'd rather go. I mean, I'd rather be. But do I want to be subjected to police brutality just because someone assumes something about me and that could ultimately kill me? I mean, my wife speaks to that all the time. Her father was a police officer in Minnesota. She said, you know, to use her quote, she said, I've been spending my entire life praying that the black men in my life come home to me, i.e. her father, me, you know, depending on what happens to me in a given day. And I have a young son who's 14 years old that, you know, now he's not doing a lot out and about, but ultimately he will be driving one day and things can happen. I mean, and the fact that we have to have that conversation with our children, our young black boys specifically, about how to handle yourself if this situation happens. Just recently, I mean, he's in a mixed environment with school, et cetera. And the mother, he was hanging out with one of his white friends, and they were going to walk up to the gas station and get a soda or some candy or whatever. And my wife made a point to say, well, make sure your son understands how to deal with the situation with my son, Jackson. And she was like, well, what do you mean? She said, well, if this happens, he needs to make sure that he doesn't leave Jackson or leave him in a situation or put him in a situation that could potentially have him typecast or stereotyped or assume that he's doing something or he's somewhere he's not supposed to be, i.e. Trayvon Martin walking down the street with a bag of Skittles in his own neighborhood, but because this individual didn't perceive him as someone that should be in that neighborhood, an altercation ensued, and we all know what happened as a result of that. So those are the things that we take a knee for to make sure that we are not put in an unfair or an unjust circumstance just because of the color of our skin.
I understand that completely. And so many men and women, African American women, stand strong. And just to say it out, because it's no secret, many African American women are accused of being the angry Black woman. And often that stems from having to protect our sons, our husbands, our fathers, our men of African American background that are facing the issues that they're facing and having to stand up and have a voice and be strong and be heard. And African American women are not afraid to do that. And sometimes you have to take on the role of being considered, whatever you want to call it. But if it takes that to help move in the right direction, African American women will stand behind and push African American men to be seen in the light that they should be and to be granted the respect that they should receive. I think it's very terrible, and I can't enforce enough how the African American male is not deemed worthy enough to be respected. And I think respect is number one. And then we can work with granting educational opportunities and making them equal in the workplace and making them equal in government and making them equal in every area of life. Start with leaders. If you're leader of your home, making it an effort to recognize the Black man. It's very important now more than ever, and not let what is going on in the world die down and make other things take precedence over the Black man. That's what shows you care. To me, when you keep the movement and keep the voice going, you keep the action going, you go out of your way to make decisions that will turn things around to equality, because African American men didn't cause the problem. As you mentioned, the 300 years back, I mean, there are hundreds of years back that we still have to move to the forefront and understand that something needs to change immediately. And what defines your immediate? Another 300 years? I don't know.
Well, it's always been sort of interesting to me is that, Blacks aren't really violent by nature. I mean,
Right.
that's a learned behavior that has happened since we've been here. Slaves weren't inherently violent. It wasn't
Right.
until we adopted, sort of the ways of the Western world that we began to show violence, and even that was more stemmed around survival or doing things to quote unquote cope in your environment. And then obviously there's the Black on Black crime that developed, gangs, etc. But that's a small piece,
Right.
in my opinion, of the history of our inherent nature. Now, you want to talk about whites, on the other hand, and the things that they subjected African Americans to for absolutely no reason other than, humanity, trying to be, equal from a human perspective. And I can remember watching a sermon by Minister Farrakhan at one point, and he spoke to the fact that I think a lot of the fear that whites have of Blacks is that if we ever truly got into power, that we would do to them what they did to us.
Yeah, well,
but that's not who we are by nature. I
not
don't
at all.
I mean, I've never seen well, I shan't say I never see, but ultimately, if we were, if the situation were swapped, and all of a sudden, we had the whip, and we were in a position to torture and maim individuals, I just don't think that's inherent to Black people, because that's not who we are. That's not where we're from. That's not in our origin.
Right.
Now, when provoked, can we be violent? Absolutely, just like anyone else. But I think there's always sort of that that fear that whites ultimately have of Blacks. It's not because of what we are or what we'll do. It's because of it's fear of retribution for what's done. That's always just been my perspective of things.
I like that. I like the way you phrase that, because I agree with you completely. African Americans are the meek and gentle and loving and kind
Forgiving.
and forgiving, for sure. I mean, it's obvious. We see it. It's forgiving, and I agree with you there completely. Do you think that's, and you said it, do you think that's the primary reason why non-Blacks are not looking into giving fair chance to Black people, or they're not even thinking about it at all?
I don't really think they even think about it from that perspective. I think really it's the sort of the blending of race that's ultimately happening sort of naturally. I mean, they talk about the United States, and they tell it, people will make statements, you need to go back to Africa, go back to where you're from, the Arabs, etc. Well, white, it's not their nature. This isn't their country either.
Right.
They came and took it,
Yeah.
just like
Hmm.
they've got no more right to be here than anyone else, other than the fact that they had guns, and that's how they ultimately did it, by force. So so when you start talking about that aspect of things, I think it's a control factor that they sort of fear also.
Hmm.
And we've always known that if you got an ounce of black blood in you, you're black.
Right.
And so as those things have happened over time, and the mixing of races, etc., they're a shrinking group. And but unfortunately, African American males are also a shrinking group. That's another
Hmm.
statistic that people may not know. Um, we are not growing at the same rate as other male populations. But that said, the white population as a whole is shrinking against the minority population as a whole. So I think that's part of the fear as well, that they feel like this is their country, and they're losing control, so to speak. So and I mean, I can't speak to that 100%, but that's sort of, I think, at the back of some of the individuals in power's concern or fear.
What do you think about the whole defunding the police? What do you think about that part? Is it,
Well,
what do they,
I would
what does
say
that even
absolutely.
meant in your view?
I don't think you can just defund the police force, because number one, if there's one thing that does work, adding police reduces crime. I think
Hmm.
that's been verified, and from history, other cities that have had violence, violence issues. When you add police force or police presence, it definitely reduces the amount of crime. Now, whether it needs to cost what it costs to do it, sure. I mean, it's hard to say there, because I know police officers aren't wealthy. They aren't
Right.
paid exorbitant amounts of money. And when I think about what they risk, putting their lives on the line every day, how do you put a value on that to
Right.
say, well, they should only be paid this much, or this type of police officer should be paid this much versus another. So I don't think you can just unilaterally defund the police force. Does it need to be reevaluated in terms of the overall cost of things? Perhaps, but I mean, but that's just like everything we deal with today. I mean, the school system, Detroit public school system. I mean, I was on the school board once. I was on the last year of the appointed school board,
Hmm.
and and I learned a lot. When you start to figure out, really how the sausage is made, you start to say, well,
Hmm.
where does all the money go? I'm
Right.
starting to ask the same questions that the parents are asking, and I'm on the board, and we're quote unquote making the decisions, but we weren't spending the money. We were just dealing with policy, et cetera. So there's a lot of different areas that we could look at and get a better understanding. I mean, just think about it historically. How does a situation happen where an individual can actually steal millions of dollars from a school board, and they not know that it's gone, other
Right.
than the fact that someone caught the person? They get caught by some paper trail, but the money's gone. So I don't know. But I would say definitely we should not just defund the police force. I don't think it's that simple.
Increased education for the police department as a whole, maybe is what that was meant. I don't know. You can't speak words into what people actually mean, but certainly encouraging improved training when it comes to diversity, um,
Absolutely.
accountability across the board with racism in general, police or not, um, would probably make a stronger impact and move toward progression with race relations and racial issues. We have just a couple of more minutes. We started late, but we're going to end a little bit soon. But I want to hear a little bit more from you, Mark. You can give some closing statements about what you feel in general, if you want to offer a recommendation in closing about racism. What do you think? You can personalize it or generalize it. Just some closing remarks.
Well, from a personal perspective, I think people need to learn to see people for who they are first. For instance, I can recall being involved in some various focus groups with Ford Motor Company, et cetera. And I remember explaining to them at times, we have to learn two languages, meaning I have to learn the quote unquote King's English. I have to be able to walk into a room and speak professionally and use proper grammar, proper verbs, etc. But then at the same time, I've got to be able to go back to sometimes where I'm from or with my quote unquote people and be able to talk slang or talk cool or talk whatever. Because at the end of the day, you know, I want to be accepted in all circles, not just the quote unquote professional circle. I can remember growing up, people saying, "Oh, well, you talk white." Well, no, I just talk proper. That's just proper. My mother made sure we knew both. So in that, or better still, you know, people will look at an individual like Michael Jordan or, Michael Jackson or whomever and say, well, you know, well, they're not really black. Well, no, yes, they are black. But they
Do
almost
they say that about Michael Jordan?
well, they'll kind of put you in
I'm just teasing, I know.
put you in a separate category of black, but not really black.
Right.
You don't act black. And it's
I
like,
got it.
what? I mean, what does that mean? So we need to just look at individuals as individuals and not based on color. Because, you know, when you talk about, you know, the N-word or things like that, I mean, you got some white N-words too, if you look at the definition of the word. So it's not necessarily, people aren't what they look like or their color. People are people. And I really think when it comes to race, we need to learn and ultimately do a much better job of understanding people for who they are. Just like, you know, all black people aren't bad, all white people aren't bad. There's definitely some bad apples. All cops aren't bad. There's always a few bad apples, but we got to make sure we don't let those bad ones, you know, as we say, you know, spoil the whole bunch. I mean, it's really that simple at times, because if I take the time to get to know you, I can break down the barriers. You know, I can break down the race, the class, the station in life, you know, the things that make us divisive. From even within race, you know, there's a lot of things that, you know, can you know, light skin versus dark skin, long hair, short hair. There's if we can get past the exterior and ultimately get to know people as individuals. That's one thing I love about my fraternity. I'm in Omega Psi Phi fraternity. We do a very good job of eliminating those things that separate us. You could be 15 or, you know, 20-year-old guy in college, and I could be a 50-year-old, you know, business owner, and we can find commonality and we can find things to talk about where I may be able to help you, and we can ultimately be friends. And so it really allows things like that to not be, or those barriers, as I mentioned, to not be the reasons that we are, you know, adversarial versus, you know, friendly. And because once you get to that, or you get through sort of that that shield, we're all a lot happier. I think the world would be a much better place.
Good marks. And I even with that, since we've been talking about taking a knee in the police department, I hope they are encouraged as well as inspired to know that we're not against police, and feel the love from me and Mark and, you know, many that are behind you in terms of protecting us, because that's very important. I mean, you have one of the most important jobs in the world. So, you know, be encouraged that we're not standing against you just because we're seeking justice overall. And then to the Black man, feel encouraged and inspired to know that the future is bright for you, even if it looks dim. Hold on, keep holding on to hope, holding on to trust. You know, give us a little time to figure it all out. But Black men, we are pushing you to the forefront to see what we can do. And now things that have happened in this world and this nation, in our cities, in our neighborhoods that are occurring more frequently, know that we are listening and you are being heard. So stay encouraged to hold on to a brighter future. Thank you, Mr. Mark Douglas. We did it, huh? We made it through. I appreciate your time, and I wish you all the best in your future and your family as well. And thank you for listening and tuning in for this last series of Talking Racism. We will keep the conversation going. So log on to the Novi Public Library's website and social media, and we'll keep you posted for the future. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.